Hello everyone, Sakuya here, and welcome back to the History of Everything podcast YouTube channel. So did you know that at one point in time, Jews were essentially banned from the United States? Well, now that sounds rather odd and extreme, which, yeah, it is. But please, allow me to tell you the story, because this is a bit of a new thing, and it was something that I learned about recently myself. Back during the American Civil War in 1862, there was a man by the name of Caesar Caskell who received a letter. And that letter was short, but its meaning was very clear and completely devastating to him and his family. It said, quote, "You are hereby ordered to leave the city of Paducah, Kentucky within 24 hours. Now, Caskell simply couldn't believe it. He had immigrated to the United States after leaving Prussia, where he was discriminated against and financially ruined because of the fact that he was Jewish. Now you had the Union Army that was telling him that he was being expelled from his new home and his business for the exact same reason. Caskell was about to become one of the Jewish people that was being ordered to leave towns, this being in Kentucky, Mississippi, and Tennessee, all during the course of the Civil War, where they were the victims of General Order No. 11, which was a discriminatory wartime declaration issued by General Ulysses S. Grant. And this whole thing is huge because Grant's declaration was the most sweeping anti-Jewish declaration in all of American history. Nothing else even comes close to it. But the ironic part about the entire thing is that despite the fact that this was an extremely wide-reaching, sweeping regulation, this whole thing wasn't actually meant to just target Jewish people. Like, yes, they were swept up in the whole thing and it did directly target them, but the actual purpose of the legislation was to go after speculators. Not that it really matters though, because although in 1862 the orders were aimed at cotton speculators, they gave all Jews, whether they were speculators or not, just 24 hours to leave their homes, their businesses, and their entire lives behind. It was the culmination of a wave of anti-Semitic thought that had swept through the United States in just a few years before the American Civil War. Because you see, by 1860, there had been an approximate 150,000 to 200,000 Jewish people in the United States, which was a massive change from the only 15,000 that were there in 1840. That dramatic rise in population was a result of the severe poverty and discrimination that was occurring largely in Germany and Central Europe, where Jewish people were oftentimes excluded from trade and prevented from marrying or subject to pogroms or other forms of violence because of their religion. So for many of the Jews, the United States was the perfect place that would offer them the kind of economic and social freedom that would be necessary to actually have their lives. But all of that being said, Jewish immigrants were not always, and very often were straight up not, welcome in many of the places that they came to. New Jewish enclaves that would appear in northern cities were oftentimes viewed with great suspicion, and when things broke out in civil war, well, it got significantly worse. But why, you may wonder? Well, almost as soon as the war began, illegal trade and smuggling between the northern states and the southern states also started. Although the Union had blockaded southern ports, goods still made their way over the border, and people who were seeking profit would continue their trade illicitly, especially as the price of cotton would rise due to the embargo. After all, the majority of agricultural crops that were being produced in the United States were being made in the South, just as the majority of industrial goods were being made in the North. Thus, there was always still parties that would go against the government in order to try and turn a profit. The issue was with this is that not only are the traders violating the government's rules, but simultaneously in trading, they are possibly damaging the war effort itself. With both sides now having two different forms of currency, oftentimes goods were traded for other goods. Cotton would oftentimes be traded for other types of manufactured goods. Now, this could be in the form of clothing, or in some cases, there was always a risk that it could be traded for in terms of ammunition. And when you are literally providing the bullets to the enemy that you are currently fighting, then you kind of have a little bit of an issue on your hand. So you had this increasingly growing black market that was continuing to frustrate both governments, and what they found was that there was a kind of perfect scapegoat that, to a degree, was involved, that being the Jews. And for General Ulysses S. Grant, who was one of the Union Army's most influential officials, this was infuriating. He was angered by the cotton smuggling that would damage the Union's ability to squeeze the South economically, and in his eyes, the perpetrators were all, or at least primarily, Jewish, though this wasn't actually borne out by any evidence. Although Jewish people were active as peddlers, merchants, and traders, and there were some that undoubtedly would make money speculating on cotton, these did not make up the bulk of the black marketeers. Just compared to their overall population, they made up perhaps a disproportionate number. So in August of 1862, as Grant is going and preparing the Union Army to take Vicksburg, he commands his men to start examining the baggage of all speculators, giving special attention to Jews. In November, he then told his subordinates that they were going to refuse to let Jews receive permits to travel south of Jackson, Mississippi, or to travel southward on the railroad. But while this was bad, nothing drastic had happened yet. At least that being until Grant's father got involved in the whole thing. You see, in December of 1862, Grant's father came down to visit him along with some, quote, friends from Ohio. Grant soon realized, though, that these friends, who were Jewish, were actually just speculators that were hoping to gain access to captured cotton from the Union Army, which absolutely infuriated Grant. He was so angry that he then fired off his notorious Order Number 11, quote, the Jews as a class violating every regulation of trade established by the Treasury Department and also department orders are hereby expelled from the department within 24 hours from the receipt of this order. Thus, this order that was issued in haste was not something that targeted specifically speculators, but rather targeted Jews as a class based off their religion. That all being said, the effect of this wasn't immediate. With Confederate raids, as well as this being 1862, thus things were not communicated as quickly as they are today, it took a decent amount of time for this information to start trickling out to the Jewish communities surrounding them. But when news would reach them, this was horrifying for Jewish Americans. As an example of this, there were approximately 30 Jewish merchants in Paducah, Kentucky, all of whom were expelled from the city along with their wives and children. 2 of those men that were being banished were actually former Union Army soldiers. But to the order, having served your country didn't actually matter. So as these people would prepare to leave their homes and board a riverboat away from Paducah, you had Caesar Caskell and others who telegraphed President Abraham Lincoln in a kind of desperate attempt to spread the word about what Grant was doing. After they were forced to depart, Caskell then went to Washington directly in order to protest the order in person. There, he approached a congressman by the name of John A. Gurley of Ohio, who then agreed to accompany him to the White House, where the men would hurriedly go to try and meet Lincoln. And these guys were the first ones to actually bring it to Lincoln's attention. Despite the fact that this order had now been widely disseminated among areas in the South, communication, again, wasn't the best, and so Lincoln had no idea that any of this was going on. He was so shocked by their statements that he had to go to his staff and ask them to please confirm that this is actually what was happening. When they did confirm it, he immediately revoked it. But of course, by this point, news of the order was beginning to spread everywhere. And although there were some people that did side with Grant's initial statement on this, the majority of newspapers and editorials did go against him for his wide-reaching statements. The entire thing was squelched rather quickly, and the discriminatory order was put aside. But the public, and especially Grant himself, never actually forgot the order. In fact, you would think from this entire thing that Grant harbored a severe hatred of Jews for the rest of his life, but that's not actually what happened. Instead, he was so embarrassed by the entire ordeal that he would spend his entire life trying to atone for it. As an example of that, when he was running for president in 1868, he confessed that the entire order was issued and sent without any reflection and without thinking. And once he was in office, he would actually go and name more Jews to public office than ever before, along with promoting human rights of Jewish people abroad, which included the protesting of pogroms that would occur in Romania, and sending a Jewish diplomat in order to object to it. Now, over the course of his life, Grant really would try to atone for his discriminatory order. The unfortunate thing is that his actions would lead to a direct rise in anti-Semitism within the United States in the 19th century, something that they would feel for quite a while. But that right there is the end of today's story. I really hope that you did enjoy it and that you learned something, perhaps a fact that you may not have been aware of, just as I was not a few weeks ago when I began studying this. Thank you to everyone who has watched. I ask that you like, comment, subscribe, do anything you can to help this video in the algorithm. Please put your comments in the comment section below to please let me know what it is that we should do next. And I will see you all next time. Goodbye, guys. I hope you have a good rest of your day.